My name is Noel Musson. I am the town's planning consultant. We're here tonight to have a public hearing on a proposed short-term rental licensing ordinance. And members of the Land Use Ordinance Committee are up here. So this would normally be a regular meeting of the Land Use Ordinance Advisory Committee. But since we only have about an hour, I'm just going to jump right in if that's okay with everybody. And what I thought we'd do tonight was a couple of different things. It's a super important topic for a lot of different reasons. And I want to just sort of set the stage a little bit. I have two flip charts up here. One flip chart is going to be for comments on the ordinance specifically. And the other one is for comments about the whole idea of the licensing ordinance in general, good or bad. And then what we're going to do at the Musson Group is really just take comments tonight, not really tabulate them, we're just going to write them down, and then we're going to have another follow-up meeting with the Board of Selectmen to kind of pass on. Here's what we heard tonight about the ordinance. So there's that part, and then by way of background, if you don't know already, the Board of Selectmen asked the Land Use Ordinance Committee to start to think about a process by which the town might consider, dealing with or addressing short-term rentals in the community. And there's no judgment, good or bad, on that. And what the committee came up with was a licensing process. So this draft that we have before us is really the work of several months of committee meetings, participation by many members of the public, discussions with the board and other things, and also the town attorney to come up with, I think our job was to come up with, or the committee's job, not really our job, was to come up with the best draft that we can, that may or may not be presented to the town. But the idea is, it's a regulatory document only in the sense that the town would, if this is adopted, require people who want to do short-term rentals to license the short-term rental as a way of starting to understand the full implications of that use in town. So that's really the sort of the basis for where we're going. I don't know if anybody who's been on the committee wants to jump in.
No, that's good. You covered it.
Okay. So the two things that I will say is there's a version that's a clean version, which is the one I think you have. This is the version that was discussed at the Board of Selectmen's meeting last week. And the big things that have changed since the last time the LUZO committee looked at it really are just taking out a few different terms, and then the end of the document, which deals with standards for enforcement and those kinds of things. That was just amended based on comments from the town's attorneys. The process as it stands is what's here. I'm happy to answer questions about it as best as I can. Now, like I said, I think part of our job really is to just take some comments, either comments on the ordinance or comments on the issue itself. And I just to set a few ground rules. Yep, there's one here, Sam. Thanks. Yeah. Just wanted to also set a few ground rules. I think hopefully it goes without saying, but everybody here is a concerned citizen of the town of Mount Desert. I think everybody wants what's best for the town, whether or not you agree with the ordinance or not. Let's try to be civil and understand that we're all trying to work for the best of our ability. Yes, Kyle.
Please ask people who make comments to announce their names.
Great. Please announce your name when you make a comment.
And also come up here.
Yeah, if you're
Ask a
in the
question.
room, if you'd sign in too.
So
And
you
if
have
you
to
didn't
come
want-
up here to ask a question.
Yeah,
before the
because the
camera?
owl
Only
Yeah.
goes so far.
only go,
All right,
yeah.
so I'm gonna be jumping around.
And also,
but,
anybody online, if
yeah,
on Zoom, put their hand up to ask a question or make a comment, that'd be great too.
yeah. I will ask Kim if you could pay attention to the Zoom. If
Okay.
anybody just says, raises the hand on Zoom or raises a hand that I can't see, will you just point it out to me? That'd be great. Just so I make sure I get everybody. All right, so does that process make sense to everybody? Does that sound like a good process? Excellent. Hopefully, I'm glad you didn't say no, because I'm not sure what we would have done. Anyway, all right, well, let's have at it. happy to answer questions about the ordinance or about where we are, but I have 2 sets of markers, so I'm ready to go. Do this thing. Yes,
I'm gonna just jump in because I had some time.
all right, can you identify
Kate,
yourself?
can you come up?
Come to the front.
Kate Chaplin.
Sure.
Couple questions, page 2,
Page 2.
the 4th paragraph down. And the last sentence, it says a short-term rental does not include legally existing dwelling units that are rented no more than twice per calendar year and for less than a total of 14 days in a calendar year.
Yes,
So I'm reading that to understand that if you only rent your house, what the state would call a casual rental,
yep,
that you're not subject to a,
yeah, the intent of that provision is to allow people to, if you're just doing like that total number of days per calendar year, right? And if the state, that's what the state calls it, that would be exempt from the ordinance, yes.
does it have to be a twice per calendar year and for less than, or I just want to make sure it's clear. When you say the twice per calendar year is what's throwing me. So if you rent for, let's say you have 3 different tenants, 3 different times for, 6 days each or whatever, no, I can't do my math, 4 nights each.
Mhm.
So that it's less than 14 days, but you technically rented it 3 times that year. Are they subject?
I believe they would be, yes. Should they be? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yep,
I would say that if the state says it's a casual rental, then they shouldn't be subject to a license. And by casual rental, that means it's not subject to state sales lodging tax. So they define it as anything less than 14 days. That's, total. So you can rent to 1 person for 14 days and not be subject to sales tax, or you can rent to 4 people for a total of 14 days, 4 different times, and that doesn't. That's my understanding. So that might be a way to define
Yep.
that.
excellent.
Next on page 3. Section D, the licenses expire on December 31st, knowing that somebody, people often list their homes or decide to rent in the fall after the season has gone forward. If they want to start promoting their house for the following season, do they have to pay for the current year and for the next year if they decide to register their house to be licensed for the upcoming season? Because if they're promoting it, they've got to show that it's there,
Mhm.
but they're not going to actually take place until the following season. I'm wondering if there's any workaround for that you can apply for the, applications for the upcoming year would start, would take effect like September 1, that you can start your application process.
I think the way we thought of it was that if you. It starts on December 31st. If you're renting your house next summer, you can advertise it whenever you want, but the license won't start till the 31st of.
But if you apply for, let's say I apply for a license in
Mhm.
September of the year,
Yeah,
am I applying it for that current year or for the following year?
For that current.
For that current
Well, if you
year.
have a license for that current year, then no, you're applying, you could apply for the next year,
So what's the latest I could apply for the current year?
anytime during the current year, you can apply for a license. I don't think
Okay.
we didn't have a deadline for when you have to apply.
Okay, so it's
just can't
fall
rent
and I
it.
can call the town and I can say I want to apply for a license for next year. And they would, that might
Yep.
need to be
Yeah,
clarified.
that was a really good comment.
Because, if they're expensive, I don't want to pay for them. The next question I have is on section 6, C and D. Smoke alarms and carbon monoxide, these are both state rules.
Mhm.
And I don't know if we need to, maybe just, it's sufficient to just say that per state mandate. So that you guys aren't saying where they need to be going and that you defer to the state laws that govern that. And I would change the language for gas alarms to propane alarms. And I don't know if the state of Maine has rules for propane alarms, do they? They have, I mean, like, fire departments have guidelines, but I don't.
Yeah, they went into effect January 1st of 2022.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, state law.
Okay. I knew there were guidelines, didn't know it was state law. Next page on page 4. Section G, at the top there, the parking. The number of short-term rental guest vehicles allowed at the short-term rental shall be limited to the number of off-site parking spaces designated by the applicant. Oh, never mind. I misread that the first time. I'm good with that language, sorry.
Okay.
Section H. Since the town provides weekly trash pickup anyway, how do you plan on enforcing somebody forgetting to put their trash out 2 weeks in a row?
I think what this provision is just requiring short-term rentals to make sure that the trash gets taken out.
In some way?
Somewhere. Yeah, it could be, take it to the transfer station or whatever.
All right. I just wonder if we can loosen that language up. I mean, even on a weekly basis, that can be a challenge for some people. They get the schedule wrong, they miss the holiday, you know, things happen and it doesn't get taken out. And I don't think it would be right to ding people for mistakes that happen. You know. Occupancy limit, I have a hard time with this language in general because houses come in all shapes and sizes, and really the biggest occupancy limiting factor is what the house is rated for. You know, if it's on a septic, what the septic will handle. And it's also, you know, for the number of bedrooms and occupants and for what its certificate of occupancy states. And I wonder if maybe rather than trying to do this math or figuring this out, that we should. Because, you know, there's a house that might have 3 great bedrooms and a fabulous septic system that can accommodate an 8-bedroom house. And one of those big bedrooms can have, you know, 6 bunk beds in it. The formula that isn't consistent with the purpose, which is to protect the house from overcrowding, and the overcrowding is going to be defined by what the septic can handle. So I don't know if that's.
Well, to answer your question about occupancies, certificate occupancies didn't come into effect until 1998. So how do you address the ones that are pre-98?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, if you're on town well and whatever, I mean, town water and sewer. I'm not sure either, and maybe it's maybe you can have sort of an either or. It's by this formula or whatever your septic is rated for, or, you know, I don't know if there's another way to think about that, but I think that could be potentially restrictive unnecessarily. Failure to acquire and or display the required short-term rental license number or include the license number in any advertising of the licensed premises. I would respectfully say that we don't force people to advertise their license number. I don't see the point of it, except that it makes it easier for people to enforce, you know, for the town to enforce it. And I know that, you know, each of us have websites that we're managing. It's hard to make sure that information gets in there accurately. And I think it makes, you know, display it. Absolutely. It makes sense to display it at the house. Whether or not it has to be advertised, I don't see that as really.
I think just by way of background, somebody else at another meeting brought up some good comments about that as well. And it's not just by way of background, that part of the reason to have the license number in the advertisement is if you need to make sure that people who are advertising for short-term rentals if they're advertising and you don't have a license, that's one way to figure out if you're doing it. So that's just by way of back. It's not an argument.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I
It-
can see how it would help with the enforcement of everything,
Yeah,
but
It might also make it more likely that somebody is not gonna rent your house illegally. The scams that go on, if there was a required license on it, would probably
required to have
justify.
on file. I'm
Well,
totally
even
good
on
with
the
that.
advertising, if you look at an ad and you see a license number, you are more likely to think it's a legitimate
But it can be
spot.
cloned, so it's.
Yeah, of course it can, but
Yeah.
I have to advertise my auction license in every auction I do.
True. And that's why I think it's fine to have, that if they're with an agency, that it needs to be on file with the agency. If they're renting privately on VRBO, Airbnb, that's up to them to create that information, and they can take that responsibility for putting it in there. I just don't know if we should force people to have it on display. I mean, I don't know, on our website, I don't know where I put it, frankly. So they could be easily found by the town,
Sure.
but if you called me and said, hey, are they licensed? I can say, yep, here's the number.
Got it.
That's it.
Awesome. Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And thank you too for, I can see that you guys removed some of the other language that you had here for suggestions from the last meeting I attended, so appreciate your hearing that.
Appreciate your time. Thanks. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, I'm Al Kimmerly. I've lived here for a while. First of all, I would like to know, what is the definition of R1 zoning? Is that just a residence where somebody would live?
So, you mean the R1?
R1 zoning
district?
is residential one zoning.
Yeah.
It's a
Yes.
zoning district.
And it's my thought, and of course only mine, that all these short-term rentals, and many of them are LLC owned. They're not, an individual. They are commercial businesses, and generally speaking, the zoning wouldn't necessarily allow commercial businesses. I know they allow some in your home,
Yep.
but this whole thing has gotten so out of control. There's people that are buying homes just to be a rental business, and it's a business. And it's causing homes to go up in cost. Younger people can't afford to buy a home now. And it's not good for the neighborhood, and I don't think it's good. I don't know how it got to this point that you could just turn your house into a hotel. When you have zoning that is, you can't make your house a hotel, you have to have zoning to have commercial property. These are turned into commercial property. They're not residential property anymore.
Yep.
And I don't see how this has really happened that way. But it is,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
it seems if we're gonna continue our zoning, laws or rules, they're not in compliance with what's happening.
Excellent point. Thank you.
No, you got a couple hands.
Yep.
You got
Let's
a
see.
Scott and Elizabeth.
How about Elizabeth Kelly?
Hi there. Thank you for having this meeting. I'm hoping that you could back up a little bit and explain the genesis for this ordinance. What is the problem that the town is trying to solve with the new licensure? And then the follow-up question to that would be, I'm assuming that it's going to take time for town staff to enforce all of this. How will the town pay for it? Are you anticipating that the revenue from these licenses is going to cover the cost of the time for the town staff? Or are property taxes going to be going up for those of us who don't rent our houses?
Okay.
I'll
So
mute myself.
Yep, thank you for your question. So to try to answer the first question, the other people on the committee can jump in, but I think everybody can, we can all agree that there's a housing crisis that's occurring on NDI and in the town of Mount Desert in general. And the Board of Selectmen asked, as a part of that, for the LUZO committee to start to think about the implications of the implications of short-term rentals on the housing prices. And in order for us to really understand that, the conversation have started to sort of evolve that we need to get more data for where the short-term rentals are, how many there actually are, and more specificity than you might be able to do by just going on Airbnb or any of the websites that you can do, because there's a lot of different ways to try to find out data, but it isn't specific enough for this community. So the evolution of the process was how are short-term rentals a real issue as it relates to the housing crisis in Mount Desert. We don't have enough information about that right now. We know that there are probably short-term rentals can and do take some year-round housing off the market. There's a lot of other implications related to that. And I don't need to make this a housing discussion tonight, although I would love to have a housing discussion with everybody. It just sort of evolved into this licensing process as a way to get the data that we need in order to understand what the challenges are related to short-term rentals. So this is sort of the way to try to start to get that. One way to try to set a framework for getting that information. So that's, I think, the answer to your first question. I don't know if anybody else.
So can I repeat that back just to make sure I understand? The licensure, the new licensure proposal is simply a way to gather data about what is seen as a larger housing crisis on the island. And when you say housing crisis, I'm assuming that you mean that the lack of year-round housing for middle-income people is, what they call the missing middle. Am I characterizing that correctly? I don't know.
Sure, I would add to your description of the housing crisis to be more than just, the whole housing picture is a big picture. So some aspects of housing take care of themselves. Other aspects of housing are not taking care of themselves. So the missing middle is one aspect. Do we have enough seasonal workforce housing to support the businesses that we want to be here seasonally? So there's a bunch of different elements to that. The question was, as it relates to this one specific topic of short-term rentals, how can we start to understand, I'm trying to think of the right words to describe it. Is it a major problem in the town of Mount Desert as it relates to this housing issue that we all have to face or not? And in order to try to figure that out, one way to do that is to create this licensing process, to understand the data just specific to short-term rentals, not the whole picture of housing. There's a lot of other things we need to think about as it relates to housing. So what we were asked to do was think about short-term rentals. What the committee came up with was a licensing process as a way to start to think about it and collect data on it, that specifically. And that could lead to other discussions. Once we have the data, it's getting to the comment earlier about, what is the land use? What are the land use implications for that particular use? Where are the concentrations of those short-term rentals? There's a lot of, conversations that could be had once we understand what the full, if there even is a problem. I think that was one of the key points.
Okay, and the follow-up was how is the town going to pay for it?
Yeah, so that is a question we are working with the Board of Selectmen on, and I don't mean to artfully dodge the conversation, but I think that that's a question that we have to iron out with the Board of Selectmen. So there's going to be a licensing fee. The town has an administration process that they have to go through. And whether or not the fees compensate or offset the cost of that's something that has to get worked out. That's a great question. Yeah. Sam.
I'm generally supportive of this idea, but I do have a couple of comments and questions. The first is as a tool to kind of investigate.
Sam, can you come up?
Sorry.
We can bring the owl to you.
I thought I was on Zoom.
My bad, Sam.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My name's Sam Copeland. I'm a resident of the town. And couple of comments and questions. Generally, I'm supportive. I think this is probably a long time coming and needed. As a kind of investigatory tool to kind of find out a little bit more about the kind of short-term rental situation in town. You may need to approach it in a more granular way, because there's quite a spectrum. For instance, we have a guest house that we rent for a period during the summer. And so that's a very different thing than somebody that has an in-law apartment. That's a very different thing than somebody renting their primary residence and moving elsewhere. So if you're going to use it to find out more about it, be really thoughtful about the questions you ask and how you ask them. Okay. Secondly, to pick up on the comment that someone made about the number of people in a bedroom, I think that's getting a little Orwellian, because there are two parents and they have a small child. Are they not allowed to sleep in the same room? I mean, I would back off that kind of oversight. Secondly, when you talk about inspections and making sure that things are up to the building code, how does that relate to grandfathered buildings? Yes, you have your carbon monoxide and fire alarms and those kind of things. But what about windows and door sizes for structures that were built prior to current building code? So be careful about how you actually the context in which you frame those questions about applicable building codes. Next is about in inspections. If inspections are to occur, when are they going to? Are they going to occur during the rental season when there are people there? So how much notice are people given scheduled? And I know that's probably getting into the weeds, but you can see where this is going, right? Secondly, or lastly, about the notice, we're not going to post a notice outside of guest house. We'll put it in the documentation that sits in the house for the rental for the tenant. So be a little more thoughtful about how you say posting, because as long as it's available to people, and I'm not sure I buy into the whole idea about kind of posting the license number on Airbnb or VRBO or whatever service, because a lot of people don't have these independent websites through which they rent their properties. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. So I'm gonna hit one Zoom comment and then we'll get back here. So how about Scott? I think Scott.
Scott and Jeff.
You have to unmute Scott.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question on this parking.
Okay.
There's you have where a garage does not count as parking. I don't understand.
Is that your
Am I
question?
reading this wrong?
No.
It says garage parking spaces that are not allowed for short-term rental guests shall not be used to meet the parking requirements. So if you have a garage and you don't let your guests park in there, it doesn't count for the parking that's
Well,
required.
I mean, if you do let them park there, then it counts.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then the other thing I have is as far as like these licenses go, it sounds like you could end up with a neighbor that's, they come up for a couple of months out of the year, maybe 2-3 months out of the year from Florida. And then all they do is they complain. And so that's my issue. I have an issue with a neighbor, they're a little, they come up for only 2-3 months. That's it. And then they end up taking the house. They drain all the plumbing out of the house. All the water's out of the house right now. The house is a ghost house. I mean, the town should look into that actually. How, half of Northeast Harbor have ghost houses. Do you realize that? They come up for 2-3 months, and then they call up their plumber down the street. He drains all the water out of the system, and then the house is a ghost house. It's dead. And this is the problem with the town. I mean, you're not getting enough people to come throughout the whole year because of the situation. You'll have birds coming from Florida or wherever. They come up 2-3 months, they use their house, which is fine. Then they drain the plumbing. And then there's no activity. But and the other thing too is if you're real, and the last guy that came up at the podium, a couple of guys back or whatever, mentioned something about, the housing shortage. I mean, at the end of the day, there's somebody that put in a proposal to the town, I believe, that wants to build 6 or 8 units, and the town is fighting them with a petition. Yeah, I don't get that either. I mean, if you want to solve the housing shortage, you build more housing. That's the way it works. I don't get it. I mean, at the end of the day, why are we beating up on short-term rentals? Mount Desert Island has been like this for years, where there's been short-term rentals, and Airbnb and Vrbo and renting out through a realtor has been there for years. All of a sudden, why are we bringing this up now?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I think those are great comments. I wrote them down, and I would just get back to the point about there are multiple things to address in town as it relates to housing. We're only in one very small piece of that right now. So again,
right. But at the end of the day, I understand it's a one small piece, but it all comes together. It's one big piece together. It's one big puzzle.
Absolutely.
You have to solve the problem by bringing in more units. You just, that's basically it. And I don't get it. I just don't.
Thanks for your comments. How about we'll take one here and then we'll go back online.
My name is Tom McRae. I have a couple of questions. Do you have a fee in mind?
What we've done is research fees. I don't have that numbers right in front of me, so we haven't even presented that to the board about what our fees are.
Does this have to be approved at town meeting?
Absolutely, yes.
And as far as inspections go, I don't know about anybody else that rents, but the insurance company comes in if you're gonna rent your house, and they do an inspection and tell you, you have to do this, and that. So,
yep.
I mean, if you're renting and you've got it insured and the insurance company knows you're renting, then your house is inspected.
Above boards. You're renting above board.
Yeah.
Yep, good comments, thank you. All right, how about Jeff Wood?
Hi there.
Hi.
Jeff Wood, Selectman. I heard a lot of great comments. I think we can get tied up in the minutia very quickly. I would reiterate what I said at the last select board, however, that meeting, that yeah, what I hear from residents, the biggest concern goes back to what one of the first gentlemen spoke of, is houses being sold to people that don't plan to live in them. Now, I know we have a tradition of summer ownership, and when I first moved here, there were lots and lots of winter rentals that would start Labor Day and go through till June sometimes. That is no longer the case. People are buying homes and running them as businesses, and I again would say that the message I'm hearing from people I talk to is that they would like us to be more aggressive to begin with, to stem the tide of more houses being sold to people that plan to run them as businesses. We can dial back later, but I understand there's some concern about the nuisance of short-term rentals and so on and so forth, but I still I agree that we need to build more units, but before we can do anything, I think we need to stem the tide of houses being sold to people that have no intention of making their home in the town of Mount Desert. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I think that collecting data and then analyzing data before we make any decisions is too slow. That's my position. We can always dial back more aggressive regulations later if we find that the data doesn't support them. But what I'm hearing people want is to stop the selling of homes any way we can to people that are going to run them. And to do that, you need to be aggressive and strict to start with.
Thanks, Jeff. Why didn't you invite us all to have the public hearing wherever you are? That's my only other follow-up question.
Sorry, I'm on the West Coast. I shouldn't be doing this, but.
No, you're good. Thank you. Anybody else in the audience? Yes. Then we'll go to, after you, we'll go to Tripp.
Okay, I'm Vincent Lawrence. I don't have a dog in this fight. I do year-round rentals. But it is a bunch of things. I got a whole list. I'll try and be quick. One thing is it starts out with 9 paragraphs. There's legitimate concerns, and then it says quality of life and quiet enjoyment. And other than construction noise, I don't think the town has a noise ordinance. Is that correct?
Correct.
It doesn't seem like there's a right to quiet enjoyment, and there's local people that make a lot of noise. I have some next to me, and that's fine. They have dogs, bark, that's fine. I don't feel like that's a problem. Other than that, I mean, the quality of life, you know, maybe as mentioned here, the quality of life increases if you can rent out a unit and stay living here, right? We're trying to solve a housing problem. We need more units, we need to satisfy short-term rentals, seasonal workforce housing, all that. So you guys came up with a licensing program, which when I hear license, I think tax. It's just a tax. It's a tax on this business, and you tax businesses that you don't want, right? If you don't want something, you tax it more. If you do want something, you give it a subsidy, right? That's how government works, right? So it's a tax on that business. Now, me renting year round, I don't get taxed on year round rentals, right? So, and businesses, like if you have a wholly enclosed business, it could be right next to an Airbnb. Are you paying a per year fee for having that? Should be equal, right? If you're running an Airbnb business or you're running a plumbing shop, you know, in your garage, or your lobstering business in your yard, seems like it should be fair. So I would just say, if you're gonna find some people for doing things, you better find everybody for doing it, right? Equal treatment under law. So putting an ordinance that just selectively targets one business over very similar businesses that may make more, you know, hauling a lobster boat down the road is a lot more traffic on the road than 2 people driving down to go to their rental. So I was concerned about the burden on the town. The fact that you're gonna like log complaints, you know, you got that. I bet there's somebody that calls us down a lot, you know, with complaints about various things. That's how it goes, right? And you're gonna have somebody, their dedicated job is to chart the complaints of people. This person's garbage got ripped apart by raccoons. They're making too much noise. They left to go see sunrise at 4 a.m. You know, like what? You gonna log all these? Is there an officer that's gonna go out and say, did you really honk your horn late at night? You know, it's like, that just seems like a waste of our resources. Yeah.
The police already do log all those complaints.
Right,
And
that's
most,
the other thing I was gonna say.
most of those complaints go to the police, and they do go talk about your dog, maybe your neighbor's dog.
Right,
Dogs barking
Right,
and
so
people
that's
making a
already-
ruckus, so those are already logged and dealt with.
right. So we don't have to have somebody else.
I wouldn't think so.
So the fact that it says that like the town is gonna log this, maybe it should be, police department is gonna log legitimate concerns. But,
You can figure out different wording.
right, so then the, you know, just assuming this goes through, then the short-term rental license holder, it goes back to this like December 31st renewal thing. Now you're putting the burden on the individual doing the rental to help you gather data. So now you're making me pay money and do paperwork so that you can get your data. It seems like it should be the other way around. If you want my data, you can ask me. Can you tell, I'll pay you $5. Tell me how many weeks you rent, what your property's like. I mean, that's why the internet is free, because they're giving your data, right? So if you want my data, you can offer me a free service, product, something. Let's see. Oh, and then, yeah, the note, posting your personal information at your front door. I don't think you want to be legally reliable for requiring somebody to post their name, their phone number, email address. You know, it's like, yeah, you're supposed to be guarding that information generally. You know, sharing it. I mean, how many people have problems with that? And then all the standards, as was previously mentioned, right? They're pretty much all state laws, right? Smoke detectors, house numbers. And then you get into the things that are probably people's real complaint: parking, trash removal, and noise, which is, I think, occupancy limits is probably they're trying to get rid of the wedding party, right? But that was also mentioned, occupancy limits. Is that going to discriminate against large families or people that come in large families, right? So it seems like that's something that should be nixed. And also, who's going to go knock on the door and see how many people are actually there?
I do.
Yeah, as the renter, as the person holding the rental, I've had people that try to sign up, like, hey, we're bringing 8 people. I was like, you can't bring 8 people. I said, well, we're only bringing 4. It's like, no, you're the same person. I know you're gonna bring 8. Now, as a resident, you can park on the street in most places. As a year-round tenant, you can park on the street. But as a weekly rental, you're not allowed to park on the street.
In what places?
Doesn't specify.
Does it specify? Or is it just to impede access? Well, that's the law already, right?
Yeah, but you can't park on the street in some zone.
Okay, right, yeah. Where there's no parking now, yes, but like,
Well,
it
it's just,
seems like it's another redundant state. So I think, oh, and then it gets into the penalties. And things like that, and that just seems like if you're trying to gather data, you don't really need a penalty, right? You'd be like, oh, we missed some data, you know, there's no damage done. And so the fact that, you know, if you violate some ordinance, then you have to come and get special permission, you're treated as if you're a criminal, or you have some, like, oh, you have a felony, you can't vote anymore, you know? You didn't take out your garbage, so now you have to come and beg us for approval to get it back. Like, that doesn't seem quite right. And then your penalties, I don't know, it goes to state of Maine stuff, which is long and wordy and kind of ambiguous. Somewhere between $100,000 and $5,000 or $25,000 is the maximum fine. So it's like,
Yep.
I mean, come up front, tell me how much the fine is gonna be. And that should be in your wording, not referring to the state's rather broad definition of what you're allowed to do. Yeah, and then my other concern is that weekly rentals in rural environments will never have noise complaints or any other sort of complaints because there's no neighbors. But people in the village are gonna get a ton of complaints depending on their neighbors. And so if you're out earshot of the nosy ones, you'll have no problem. And so now is it my fault for owning a property next to a neighbor paying? Like, that seems.
there have been complaints from the rural ones too.
Right, yeah. That's,
So they're-
that's from shotgun. That's.
Well, and also from noise, not always shotgun.
Good comments,
But,
thank
yeah.
you. Yep, I don't mean to be a rush, but I also want to make sure we get to everybody and just to do a little bit of a time check. We have like 15 minutes, 15 minutes left.
You should get these guys,
Okay,
you should get these guys.
yeah, I want to
waiting
get,
a long time.
Tracy had her hand up first, I believe, so Tracy. And also, while Tracy's unmuting, People have written comments in the comments section, and I assume we have this recorded, so we can go back here and look at we can look at the comments too and record those.
Okay,
Tracy?
this is Tracy Aberman. I spoke at the Board of Selectmen meeting and my position on this remains unchanged. Put me in the against this completely column. I don't think this should be a warrant. I don't think this should go to town meeting at all. I feel that this is an invasion of the homeowner's privacy and our rights as tax-paying property owners. And I agree with the guy who just spoke. You guys are billing this as a quality of life issue, which is a noise ordinance and a parking ordinance. But what you're really doing is gathering data. You're giving no actual specific fees, no amount. Every time we've been at a meeting about this, somebody has asked about the amounts, and every time that has been brushed off. This has already failed in Bar Harbor, and they had to hire someone for $43,000 a year to maintain it, and it did not. The town is not happy with how that's going. This is going to end up being a bureaucratic nightmare and costing us in license fees, and eventually having to hire a dedicated employee. Not to mention that we've already spent money on Noel, the consultant. This proposed license answers none of the issues that it was supposedly designed to answer, because calling it a quality of life issue is not addressing the short-term housing rental versus the year-round rental problem. So I don't really understand why the bill starts as saying it's a quality of life or a quality of life issue, when really what you're trying to do is mine us for information that you don't want to tell us what you're going to do with this information. And 3 years down the road, you may turn around and say, well, thanks for all your information, guys. Now we're going to tell you, you can't rent your houses at all. Some board of strangers has decided you can't rent your house anymore. Concerned citizens complained about noise. So the town comes forward with this after 6 months of work. I don't really understand why the first step wasn't to go on VRBO, go on Airbnb, talk to the real estate agents, and come up with a number or a percentage of this is what we have versus our 2,000 parcels of land. We have 120 year-round rentals. I also don't understand why this isn't being written as if the real concern is for people who rent houses as businesses. Most of us rent our houses to pay our mortgage and pay our taxes and be able to live on the island. But there are some people who come in and buy 6, 7 houses and run it as a business. And if that's the case, that is a problem. But I don't understand why you're going through all these hoops to exclude some groups, include other groups. These people can rent for this many days. This is considered a short-term rental if it's less than this many days, when all you really have to say is, do you rent more than 3 properties? You are running a business. You need to be licensed. I don't think every person on this island needs to be licensed. And I think a lot of the things that are in this statement, I don't know which draft I have last seen, but I think a lot of them are redundant and already covered in insurance law and state law. And really the 2 things that aren't are the noise ordinance and the parking ordinance. So Tim, that's my comment. And this is the 3rd time I've spoken on it. And I just don't think we should be voting on this at the town meeting. I don't even think it should make it to the town meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy.
Yep.
Anybody in the audience here want to add any other comments?
Noel,
Hold on.
That's the eventual.
Yep. Anybody else here? All right, Dave.
we haven't, the provision on penalties, the
Yep.
board hasn't addressed that at all. Every time that we've met, you've told us that it's been at the attorney, and now it's come back to us. And I'm definitely opposed to that section that puts it back to the MRSA standards, which is, it's like a 4-page article that covers a whole bunch of things, maybe including this, but I don't think that penalties item D is necessary at all. I think it's covered
under this section where the selectman can revoke a license.
Thanks, Dave. This is the language that we got right from the town's attorney when we talked to them, so, but we'll. I wrote that down, Dave. Let's see, I think there's somebody whose initial is J.
Hi all, I would like to say that I agree with Tracy and I also agree with the gentleman that spoke before Tracy. I think that this is a tax. I don't know why. I'm not hearing a clear definitive reason as to why we need this. I'm also not seeing a clear definitive answer as to where the money is going to be going. I'm hearing a lot about how this is an attempt to lower house prices on the island. To which I would argue that if I were to take my home off of the websites and no longer rent, that locals are suddenly going to be able to afford the house for what I would list it to sell for. I don't think you can control market rates. I don't think you can control market values through license. So I don't think if this is an attempt to fix the short-term home shortage on the island, that this is a way to go about it. As far as home regulations, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, the insurance company takes care of that. As far as noise complaints, bad renters, the police takes care of that. I also think that the current language written in the on the website does not talk about transferability from one house. If I'm a homeowner and I sell my property, the license does need to transfer. So that's super important. It needs to be rewritten. And I also don't understand, you have a right to a continued use. So the house before we purchased it was used as a rental and it should therefore stay a rental. I bought it under those terms and conditions. There were no local rules or legislation put in place at the time in which I purchased my home. If this is something new that the town wants to visit, it should be relevant to all home purchases going forward, but should in no way, shape, or form affect the houses that are currently renting. And in a previous meeting, I heard the conversation about how you're suddenly starting to see all of these homes pop up on the rental platforms. And I will say that the reason being is not necessarily because these are new home rentals, but people are realizing that you can go onto VRBO and Airbnb and bypass the 15% management company rate that you would have to pay to a local real estate agent, like Knowles or any of the others who will list your vacation home for you. They're finding that they don't have to pay that 15% fee if they do it themselves. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the influx of rentals that you see on these platforms are an indication that there are more. I would say it's an indication that people have gotten smarter about how to control their own rental, but not necessarily, these are not necessarily new properties. Homes have been rented on the island since the 1800s. Show me proof that this is impacting your community. Show me proof that there is a direct result of short-term housing as a result of the rentals. I'm just not seeing it. And I'm hearing a lot of questions being asked about what this is really about. And I'm not really hearing a clear, definitive answer. And I think if you're going to make a rule that is going to impact so many on the island, there has to be clear language, a clear, definitive problem, and a clear, definitive solution. And again, I also hope that you're prepared to deal with the fallout of telling people that they can no longer continually use their homes the way that they bought them and the way that they were previously used and the way that they are currently being used. This is legislation, like I said, that should impact people going forward, but should in no way, shape, or form impact anybody that is currently renting.
Noel,
Yes.
Dick Broom here. Who was the last speaker? Who?
Yep, just identified as Jay. Yeah, Jay, can you say your name so we can get it on our record?
Sure, my name is Jen.
Jen what?
Jen what?
All right, hey, we have one thing we need to, Kim, you want to read whatever?
Oh, this is our, right now.
Okay, so we have like 2 minutes left.
You got another hand up though.
Scott, you have something
Yes, Scott.
different than what you said before?
I basically, the last lady that just spoke, Jane, I'm 100% behind her. I definitely think that, absolutely. I mean, I can understand if the town wants to come in and check my smoke alarms and fire protection and stuff. I'm fine with that. But I actually think this is a huge overreach, and I don't think it's going to accomplish anything. You're not going to accomplish anything with the housing shortage on the island through this legislation or through your proposed draft. The only way this is going to be accomplished if you build more housing. That's it. And at the end of the day, I work with a local realtor. She's sitting in the room there, and I'm always happy to rent out my place long-term, and she does it. I tell you, I'm coming up the next meeting. I'm coming up in March. I'm going to be there in person. I'm going to have to take a hotel room because I actually have my house rented to somebody that actually is using it and bringing business to the town. I don't know what the big aggravation in this town is against short-term rentals. This town, Northeast Harbor, and the whole island depends on tourism, and you're shooting yourselves in the foot by these crazy rules. I don't get it. And who's gonna pay for all this enforcement? Where's the money going to come from? Sir, I understand you're kind of looking down right now, the consultant. At the end of the day, who's going to pay for this? It's a big bureaucracy, it's a big money grab. And I don't see any use in this whole thing at all. I think it's a big waste of time. I think the efforts should be directed towards building affordable housing on the island, not this bozo stuff. And that's all I have to say. And I will be there in person in March. And I will stand up at that podium. I'm not going to be on Zoom anymore. I think this is important. This is a big money grab. It doesn't make sense to me. It makes sense if you want to check out smoke alarms, see if people are compliant for safety. I get it, but nothing like this is silly. And it's just, it's going to cause a lot of issues because you have certain people that are near neighbors. These neighbors, they come up for 2-3 months. That's it. They stay in the town for 2-3 months and then they leave. Then they call up their plumber. They drain the water out of the pipes and then it's a ghost house. Has the town looked into that? Why doesn't the town talk to these people about putting their houses out there in the winter so people can use them? You should look into that. That's all I have to say. And I will be there in March. Thank you.
Scott.
Thank you.
All right.
No. Hey,
Yes.
Noel, can I just say one thing? I am part of the LUZO and I will reiterate this, and I've said it before. When this all started.
Stephanie talking?
Yeah, sorry. Hey, Jerry. This was brought to us from the Board of Selectmen. We did not just sit around one day and decide, hey, let's start talking about short-term rentals and starting a storm here. It was brought to us to start talking about figuring out. I just want to make that really clear because I think there are some misconceptions that we're just coming up with this on our own, this committee, and we are definitely not. It was brought to us by the Board of Selectmen to start thinking and talking about this. And I just want to make that clear that it didn't come out of nowhere. And it was definitely brought to us to talk about and start working through figuring out what to do, if anything, about it. So I just want to make
Thanks,
that.
Stephanie.
Yep.
Yep. So just in closing, I want to just say thanks to everybody for making comments. We still have multiple opportunities other opportunities to kind of refine this. I believe that the next Board of Selectmen meeting that we might be talking in 27. And we still have a few things left to refine. The goal, as I stated from the beginning, was two things. One, to try to understand, what the issues are on the broader scale. And I think I can summarize a few things that I've heard, but we're going to take all this information, write it down, get it to the Board of Selectmen as they make their determination on whether or not this should go forward. And then also, there are some things in the ordinance that still need to be clarified and thought through. So the goal in any event is if this does get to the town, we want it to be the most balanced and good ordinance it can be for people to consider one way or the other. But that's not a guarantee that it's actually going to get to be voted on this year. Larger picture stuff, though, I think as I observe this conversation over the multiple meetings we've had on it, is it really does relate back to the year-round housing concern and other housing concerns that are really important to the character and the longevity of this community. So it's been interesting to hear comments related to that as well, and other things and other ideas that we can start to look at that are going to help solve that issue as well. So the comprehensive plan is starting up. Encourage everybody to actually pay attention to that process as well, because it's a really important process that you're going to be going through. You know, sometimes we're going through that process, and then the longer term, we're getting back to Jeff's comment. What are the things that we need to do now so that we don't lose the time that we need as things are happening? So anyway, thank you for all your comments. We have the people who wrote comments online. We have that. We're going to pull everything together and get it to the board. Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, and everybody.
All right.